Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Oxygen for the Soul. This week's Parsha is Parshat Bahar. Now, Bahar is a fascinating Parsha. It begins with those famous words, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Bahar Sinai Lemor Bahar. God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, and then it quickly goes into the laws of Shemitah. And I want to speak about Shemitah, and I want to speak about it also in the context of what holiday we celebrated yesterday. Yesterday, we celebrated Pesach Sheni. And if you're familiar with Pesach Sheni, then you know that Pesach Sheni was an opportunity for Jews who were unable to bring the Korban Pesach. They were unable to bring the Paschal offering because they were impure. And as a result of their impurity, they missed the opportunity to go ahead and bring the sacrifice. Now, Judaism is very clear about time. And there are certain times when we can do certain types of things. There are certain times when we can't. For example, suppose you're having a really hard Friday. And for whatever reason, you were unable to light candles. Once Shabbat starts, there's nothing you could do to light candles. It's over. So the question is, why is it that over here, do these people feel that God gave them a second chance? You know, like on Shabbat, I missed the time is gone. So what were they thinking over here, A? And B is, why does God concede? People often say that Pesach Sheni is about giving people second chances. The idea of forgiving, giving people, sometimes there are unforeseen circumstances, specifically with these people, it says that they were involved in the digging up the bones of Joseph to prepare him to be brought out of Egypt into Israel. And as a result of their kindness, their chesed, they're fulfilling the promise that Joseph made the brothers take, that one day when they leave, they'll take his bones with them. And as a result of their kindness, they were excluded from being able to perform this mitzvah of of Korban Pesach, of bringing the Paschal offering. So they come to Moses. Moses, listen, you know what? The answer is probably no, but because you're so dedicated here, I'll ask God. God comes back and says, you know what? In 30 days' time, you have something called Pesach Sheni, second chances. You could go ahead and bring this offering in 30 days. Yesterday was exactly 30 days from Passover. Okay? So now people often think that the story is about, well, God's so awesome, he gives us second chances. But I think there's a deeper lesson here that we often forget, and it goes like this. It's not about second chances. It's about your ratzon, your desire, your drive. These people were so driven and so motivated by a deep desire to fulfill one of God's commandments that they came to Moses and said, we want this second chance opportunity. We want to do more. So as a result of their ratzon, we say, En davar omer lefnei haratzon, nothing stands in the way of the will. And in response to this concept, this idea, Hashem says, because you're a son, your will is so passionate, you're so aligned, you want so deeply to have this ability to do this mitzvah, I'm going to give you that opportunity. And therefore, the Ratzon has the ability of changing reality to such where now you have something called Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni isn't just about second chances. Pesach Sheni is about a person's will so profoundly tethered and connected to God that God changes the nature of the halacha to suit their unique needs. Isn't that powerful? What motivates us? What are we doing to draw ourselves closer to God? How are you and I ensuring that our ratzon is in sync with what God wants from us? So there's a very simple litmus test. If everything that you're doing in your Judaism is motivated by emotion, you're doing something wrong. The only thing that should be motivating us Jewishly, religiously, spiritually is something called da'at, knowledge, wisdom, instruction. And I use that as an introduction to this week's Parsha. Parshat Bahar is fascinating. So it tells us these laws of Shemitah, and we all know the laws of Shemitah. Shemitah is, for a agricultural society where you have farmers who farm, and remember, in the world they live in, every day of farming is an opportunity to ensure that you have food, because if you don't farm, you don't have food, you know what happens? You die. There were no pantries filled with food or grocery stores or Costco's to buy things on sale. You farmed every single day was an opportunity of preparing for the winter and storing and planting and so on and so forth. So in the seventh year, they are told to leave the land fallow. No planting, leave it alone. And God promises that in the seventh year, as a result of your actions of leaving the land fallow, I promise you, I will give you a double portion of, I'll give you a double amount of food. I will do everything I can to give you much more than whatever it is you find yourself having right now. So, so let's go through this. Let's see what Rashi says over here, because Rashi over here is fascinating. Rashi says like this. Bahar Sinai, Ma inyan shmita etzel Har Sinai. Why does, he asks the question, why does the Parsha begin with telling us that this particular episode happens at Mount Sinai, that these laws come from Mount Sinai? Don't all the laws come from Mount Sinai? Why are we singling out this particular set of laws more so than any of the other laws? That's a fair question, right? So what is the link between Mount Sinai and the laws of Shemitah? Why do we got to stress it here more so than in other places? So, one easy answer is simply that Shemitah is something that the Jewish people cannot actually practice until many years later. Mount Sinai was in the beginning of the 40-year process, and therefore the point they're making right now is that when the Jews are in Israel, these laws were not just something that came out of nowhere. These laws are very much tethered to the Sinai experience, even though they can't actually fulfill them until they enter the land of Israel. So the details of all the other commandments were transmitted on Mount Sinai in the same way they were translated for Shemitah, even though they couldn't go ahead and actually express those laws until they came to the land of Israel. So that's one answer. But there's another one over here that I think is also relevant and also important. And that is the idea that the Khatam Sofer suggests. He says that Shemitah is the one mitzvah that demonstrates and reflects divine authorship. That the mitzvot in Shemitah are not just, don't do this or do that. It requires a tremendous amount of emunah, a tremendous amount of belief. You're going to tell me that I'm going to take a whole sabbatical year? I spent the last 6 years, tilling the earth, planting the seeds, gathering, shearing, and all these things. Now you're going to take a whole entire year off. Are you crazy? How can I do that? And what we're saying is the following. You think that you're in control of what happens. You think that if you plant seeds, that automatically the earth is going to produce fruits, that it's going to go ahead and produce vegetables. It doesn't work like that. Think about what you're doing. You're taking a seed, okay? You're planting it into the earth. It rots, and out of the rotten seed, life and food begins to emerge. That's not normal. I can't plant seeds on Mars and get fruits to grow on that planet. I can't do it on the moon, where we're figuring out how to do those things by tweaking it. But the nature is such that we think that these are normal things. When the Jewish people were in the desert and they saw manna falling from heaven, what did they say? Miracle, holy cow. They were aligned with God's truest expression of this world. No longer any kind of uncertainty and doubt. It all comes from God. When the Jewish people came into the land of Israel and they saw fruits growing out of the earth, you know what they said? Miracle. I thought that food comes from heaven. And now you're telling me I could take some fruits, some seeds from the fruit, and then throw it into the earth, and then that's going to go ahead and give me trees and food forever? Like, how does that even work? How does it make sense? Now think about it even more deeply. If you're going to go ahead and buy into the evolutionary theory, that this is all an accident that happened over and over again, how is evolution aware of the fact that seeds that fall have to fall away from the tree? Do you know that the seeds are designed to fall away from the tree? The branches are designed to keep the fruit away from the tree, so that when the fruit fall and the seeds and the fruit decompose and the seeds go into the earth, that you have trees don't grow on top of the original tree and kill the tree. How did nature know that? How are they aware of so much of the nature of all things, right? That doesn't happen by accident. That, my friends, is instruction. Okay, we're looking at a world that has tremendous amount of wisdom and instruction in it. That comes from an intellectual source. And therefore, when you and I are reading this week's Parsha, and we're reading about the idea of Shemitah, we're not just reading about, God said, don't do anything in the seventh year, because in the seventh year you'll be blessed with double. That is not something a man can write. Okay? And the Khatam Sofer is pointing out that this is a specific commandment that no human being can promise. Only someone who is the author of the planet, someone who is aware of every single intricate detail of life that can promise. Think about the things that you and I experience. We take it for granted. Sight is a miracle. Seeing is a miracle. But even more miraculous than seeing, I can understand why you need to see things, but why do you need to hear things? How is nature, evolution, aware of the fact that sound waves exist? That human beings need to have, sound to go ahead and have a more meaningful experience. How do they know that? How did evolution figure out that the ears need to be folded in a particular kind of way, in the most perfect way, so that the waves that are outside of me can come into there's three little bones and a drum in my ear that will take the vibrating sounds out of our ears, okay, out of the world, out of the room that we're in, convert those vibrations into sounds and words and sentences so that you and I could go ahead and have this ability of understanding the world in a more meaningful way. How did it figure that out? We live in a world that is guided by an intellectual creator who has a tremendous amount of wisdom that put all things into motion. But we've been so duped into thinking that, that all things are just natural, a natural expression of the world, that, it's just nature. Nature is something that happens frequently, and this is what we should expect. And therefore, Shemitah reminds us that you should not expect these things, that these things are all a miracle. When you hold an apple in your hand, do you know that that apple instruction came from a rotting, dying seed that was lifeless? And we buried it, and then somehow, at the end of all of that, it was able to come out and emerge to become something that is a life-giving force to the planet? That the whole entire planet is working in unison with each other, in support of one another, so that life can emerge? It's a reminder that these are laws that are coming from a higher plane, a higher place. And this is why Bahar starts out in this unique way. We want people to recognize that this is a unique opportunity to find God through nature. Now, there's something else over here that I want to point out. Rashi, like we said earlier, begins with a famous question, right? Why is the word Sinai connected to Matan Torah, right? And he says that it teaches us that the very commandment, that in general, all the principles and even the specific details, everything was given on Har Sinai, right? But that doesn't fully answer the question, right? It doesn't explain why Har Sinai is mentioned specifically here in the context of Shemitah, right? I understand generally, I got it, but how do we answer this? So this is a question of a guy named Rabbi Menachem Sachs, not related to Jonathan Sachs. This is the son-in-law of Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank in Menachem Zion. And he says as follows. He gives us a very deeper insight into this connection. And he says, if you think about it, all of the mitzvot, and we're going to do that in a minute, in Parashat Bahar, they demand that the members of a higher social strata, okay, not exploit those who are members of a lower social strata. The rich people should not take advantage of the poor people, right? And they stress the significance about having a complete equilibrium in the actual system. Now let's look at the laws that are discussed in this week's Parsha. You have Shemitah, you have Yovel, you have Tzedakah, you have Ribit, and you have Onah. Okay, so Shemitah is every seventh year, the land has to go, fallow. Okay? In that year, all the Hebrew slaves go free for 1 year. Okay? And there has to be equality in the financial arena. We know that every 7 years times 7 years, something called Yovel, the 50th year. Okay? Everyone goes free. All of society is completely rebooted. All property goes back to its original owners. Everything is rebooted. Everything is started again. Tzedakah, a poor person, he had to sell all of his possessions. He was given. We have to give this guy the opportunity to buy back everything that he sold. Okay, the buyer's rights are limited by his unique duty to go ahead and help this person to reform him back to the place that he was before. Ribit is what? Is lending without usury. Right? You're going to go ahead, someone who is having a hard time, he wants to borrow money, he wants to do some parnasah. Don't give this guy high interest rates. No interest at all. Give him a free loan so that he can pull himself out of the financial difficulty that he finds himself in. And onah, what is onah? It's forbidden to go ahead and to mislead or engage in any kind of price gouging. You can't go ahead and 10x, like in Gaza right now, people are selling like a can of Coke for like $50, right? You can't, there are laws against that. You have to be open and honest when you're transacting with anybody. You can't overwork an employee. You can't overcharge a buyer. All these commandments are all about social cohesion. There has to be a sense of equality and dignity in society. And therefore, by stating at the beginning of this parasha that all of these laws were given at Har Sinai, the Torah is telling us that the root principle that all Jews are equal in the eyes of God, that's from Har Sinai. That's what Chazal teach us. That it doesn't matter whether one gives a lot or a little, as long as one's heart is directed heavenward. It's about your ratzon. Where are we directing our will? It's where our will determines the reality that you and I are in. If you're walking around and you're kind of, allowing this more base nature of your spirituality to motivate you, because there is something called a intrinsic desire to connect to God, and it comes from a superficial place. You can have a superficial relationship with Judaism. But what the Parsha, the Torah, all the Parshiot, everything that all the rabbis are talking about are really about making the intellectual choice to connect to God. I don't want it to be emotional only. I need to know that you're using reason to connect to God. I need to know that you're thinking through the subject. I need to know that every single day you're spending 5 minutes about developing a deeper understanding of who you are and what it means to connect to spirituality. Because if you're not doing that, you're just going with the flow. And if you're going with the flow, you might be making all kinds of mistakes. I would even tell you more than that. When you see religious people with all the external trappings of religiosity and you see them doing wrong things, you should know that that person's religiosity is not coming from a place of dat. It's coming from an emotional connection to God. God is not interested in an emotional connection. He wants your heart to be focused on your mind, to be driven by wanting to connect to God in the most deepest, powerful way. That's what this is. All these things, let go of your nature, stop thinking about yourself for a moment, and think about how you can go ahead and be someone who is giving more to society. And Rabbi Vajmi Bar Tanur says some similar idea in the first Mishnah in Perkei Avot. The Mishnah begins by telling us that there was a breakdown. It goes from Moshe to Yeshua to Zekenim to the Ajnei Knesset Gedolah, right? That is the first Mishnah in Perkei Avot. Okay? Now, wouldn't this particular summary be more meaningful if it was in the beginning of the first Masechet of Shabbat, right? This Mishnah represents all of oral Torah, okay? And therefore, the reason why Perkei Avot is there is to establish that it's from Har Sinai. But why establish that everything is from Har Sinai in a Mishnah, in a book that has to do with very technical, general, ethical guidelines and advice? Okay, so there's one idea over here, all right? I don't have to link Shabbat, Nazir, Menachot to Har Sinai. Well, Shabbat and Nazir is obviously from God. Like I recognize that there's no, you can't contend that those concepts are coming from a spiritual place. But Perkei Avot is about ethical principles. And that even the ethical principles that could be man, right? You have the Code of Hammurabi. What makes ethical principles unique, right? And therefore, the Mishnah is telling you that even the things that are obvious to us, the ethical principles, are coming from a higher place. They're coming from a deeper source. Okay? And maybe this is why Rabbi Akiva emphasizes that the commandments to V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love your neighbor, is just as important principle of, V'ahavta of Zeh Klal Gadol. The reason why he says V'ahavta l'recha is Zeh Klal Gadol b'Torah, right? Is simply because it's all coming from God. It's all the same thing. The simple thing of just loving your neighbor, that's like a completely intrinsic thing. Even that is coming from a divine place. Okay, so he teaches us that the major principle comes from even simple things in Judaism. Ethical principles come from a higher place. The super spiritual things like Shemitah, of us creating a greater, better society, that's driven certainly by God. Now, we know this parsha is often read before Shavuot, right? And therefore, we know this Sunday is Lag BaOmer, okay? We're almost, we're 4.5 weeks into the counting of the Omer. We're almost finished. This is the time between now and Shavuot. We have a few weeks left to rededicate ourselves to improving our relationship with the man, the one above. Okay? How do we do that? We commit our ratzon, just like in Pesach Sheni. We commit ourselves to a Judaism that is rooted in wisdom, in knowledge. We commit ourselves to a Judaism that is not an emotional response, but one that is rooted in chokhmah. Chokhmah comes from the words koach ma, the power of what? The quality of our lives are an expression of the quality of the questions we are going to ask. Ask. Every single day you should have a question you're trying to solve. Every single day you should have something that you're trying to understand. Every single day there should be one little thing that you're doing to move the needle that helps you get a little bit closer. Lo alecha ligmor hadavar. You're not here to finish things. You're here to start all kinds of things. Okay? What is the thing that we're trying to start? We're trying to start becoming adults. We're trying to remind ourselves that we're not emotional babies, but we're intellectual superpower beings, that our choices matter. And the thing that matters the most is how and where we point our ratzon. You point your ratzon in the right place, Hashem will change the laws of nature for you. You want miracles to happen? Exercise the miracle of being a human being. Exercise your free will. Direct your will to want something more and let God do the rest. Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom Mevarach. Thank you so much for listening.